Last week, I sat down with product discovery coach, founder, and friend, Niko Noll, and what we wanted to tackle was this conundrum or this paradox that is about speed versus quality. So we know we need to move fast in product discovery, but how do we balance that against getting rich insights? We covered a range of topics from how do we maintain that balance.
So I'm not saying like become scientists, but simply going to the step of we believe that dot dot dot.
To talking about if you're really time poor, where should you focus your energy out of everything you can do in product discovery?
If you have this perspective of like wanting to be efficient with your time, spend a lot of time on.
As well as getting even into topics around common product discovery tooling.
The simple kind of like framework stack that I use 80% of the time is.
This is part of a free monthly webinar series that I run as part of Product Pathways. If you're interested in joining us live, there are links to the socials below that you can follow us there to be notified. And whilst I'd love to see you at a future event, you don't have to because I always put out these recordings. And on that note, I'm not going to ramble any longer. Here is the event. So the way that we're going to do this sort of format we're going to go through is Niko and I are going to we have some slides. Topic we're going to cover is product discovery. We want to talk about basically this balance and this trade-off between opting for speed and quality. If you think about it, like we're often talk about, move fast. It's time to market, move fast and break things. At the same time, there's, can't move too fast. There's a quality aspects. We'll talk about it. We'll frame that. So we're going to share slides in a second. Niko's going to talk for a few minutes about that. Hand it to me. I'll talk for a few minutes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move into just a bit of a facilitated chat, like a fireside chat between the two of us. I have some questions. We'll play by ear as well. At that stage too, very keen to get any questions from you. So if you have some questions, throw it in and we'll kind of have this three-way conversation between the two of us and then obviously you as well online. So on that point, I am going to switch the screen and hand it to you, Niko.
Yeah, I can take over. I just intro this format quickly that we came up with, which is not a new invention, but we wanted to just basically take two sides of the same argument. We are both usually people that I think highlight nuance a lot, and that can get quite boring because we usually say it depends. So the intention with this setup was just to say that we make like little short opening statements that kind of take one side of the argument so we can have the nuance discussion afterwards. But we actually start with a little bit more of an opinionated take. So that was the idea, and my job is to take over the speed part of the argument, the speed in product discovery. So let me just like quickly make my case here before Ant shoots me down. So the path to speed, want to run through four things with you: why you should care, what breaking the sound barrier means. If you think about speed, well, that's kind of in there. I'll explain. Why would I know what I'm speaking about? And then the final point on why speed is more important than quality in product discovery in most cases. The TLDR here is that being shot out of a cannon will always be better than being squeezed out of a tube. That's the best generic quote. There was no Einstein quote available, so this is the best generic quote I could find. But it is, and I think in the discussion we will get into it, it is maybe more apt than I thought initially. So let me expand a little bit on that. Why should you care about being squeezed out of a straw or shot out of a cannon? You're probably building product. You're probably aware that experimentation, figuring out kind of what to build, product discovery is something worth doing. You oftentimes, at least with the people I talk to, think, well, that's something I just can't afford. Money-wise, time-wise, resource-wise. You are busy. Even if you know the best practices about how to run experiments or how, like you have the skills, even if you have the tools, you might not have the time. And so maybe it sounds like something for teams that have a UX researcher, data analyst embedded, just in a lower stress environment where you have some time for this stuff. So this part of the argument is really about breaking the sound barrier. It's about saying that speed is possible, right? That you can accelerate to a point where you can do regular experiments. And that Scrappy is okay. So that's the trade-off, obviously, that we're going to discuss. But Scrappy is okay. Speed is possible. And what that leads to, and this is the quick like three-liner I have here, is just that you always have some kind of assumption of what you think like will work and what the users want. And if you do go with speed, if you go with me instead of with Ant, what you will have is you will have some insight before making the decision. And I'm not saying you have perfect insight, you don't have perfect data, but you have some insight before making the decision. The other variant is, if you go with quality always, is that you will have an assumption. Then you have to make a decision because the product team is already running, the engineers are idle. Somebody needs to do something. So somebody is making a decision. And then what you usually do is you do cover your ass research or retroactive research where you afterwards figure out that this was a great idea all along. So I want you to be able to have some insight before making decisions, and feel empowered to do an experiment every week, ideally after our discussion. That would be the dream. Now, I know it's not easy. I did it and I did it badly, and I know how to tell the difference. That's kind of the summary here. I've been doing product discovery coaching for the last 3 years, mostly. There was some other gigs in there, but for the last 2 years, it's been exclusively that, which means product coaching with a focus on discovery. So basically, trying to get teams into kind of a more continuous discovery habit, is what happened most of the time. And I can say I failed also in coaching teams to get there. So it's not easy to break the sound barrier. It's not easy to get to that point, but it's possible. So speed versus quality overall. Just want to quickly give a bit more framing. I gave you the TLDR already. Product discovery is about figuring out what to do next, what to build next, right? And figure out what users want and what they want to pay for and what's feasible. You know these things. Speed, just to give an example, is a Scrappy 3-user interview research effort that you have. Let's take the example of you have this great idea from the board, and they say, my daughter tells me that we need PayPal in our checkout. And instead of just building it straight away, you say, okay, let me at least like really scrappy, quickly check if our existing users that don't manage to do the checkout actually have a PayPal account. I'm just going to ask them, right? Something like that, or about their payment methods that they use generally. So that would be really scrappy, right? That's not statistically significant, etc. Quality is where that comes in. That's a real study that you probably have seen where there's a report at the end, where they're controlled for sample size. So this is quality, and that's just to tell the difference, right? These are kind of the two ends of the spectrum. Making decisions based on bad data is bad. We don't want to make wrong decisions. We don't want to have the bias towards action in the wrong direction. Totally understood. Rigor does increase the reliability of research, but deciding based on no data is even worse. So that's the big but is that the value of insight actually decreases over time. So I made great charts here. They are very detailed and based on real data. We have here on the left the value of research on the x-axis, on the y-axis, and on the x-axis time. And you just see that the value decreases over time. Now, why am I saying this? Well, it's because you're probably moving already. And so there's an exception for this if you there's still opportunity cost, but there's an exception. If you do a discovery before and you do research before, and then you would start something and you have zero invest until you're done with the research, okay, maybe the chart is not quite like the one on the left. What usually happens in all cases that I've seen is that there's some kind of project running, some kind of initiative running, some kind of team there, and they're doing kind of some research and discovery at the same time as building. That's the whole idea of having a product team and not a separate like innovation team. So what happens is there's already some cost involved. And the sooner, and this is a pretty basic insight, but I just wanted to make it, on the right-hand side here, you can see that the sooner you have the point of insight, just allows you to course correct much sooner. So that means that you can reduce cost waste, right, in cost and in hours spent on stuff. And so the sooner you have insight, the more valuable that is. That is a little bit the analogy that I had back in the day from my team lead, where it was when I was a software engineer. It was just like the cost of finding a bug late is incredibly high. And the sooner you find the bug, the higher value that insight is. And this is kind of the same concept. So just a few other points here. What else is speed good at? If you focus on quality versus speed, you have the problem of analysis paralysis. I see this oftentimes, and there's two ways that happens. It's either not getting started, saying, we don't know anything about the user profile. We don't know anything about the needs. We would need 6 months funded like foundational research to even get started. Okay, nobody's going to sign off on that usually. So what you do is you don't even start with that. The second part is you don't finish, meaning that you haven't reached your sample size yet. You haven't reached your statistical significance. You know you need a more complex study setup. And so you maybe start with some research, but you actually never finish the whole thing. So just as the final message for you is that you can do it, right? So just talk to users is something, I bought a domain for that, is something that I repeat over and over again. I know it's simplistic and reductionist, but I believe in it. Do the simplest experiment possible is something that you can take to the next level. And I would say, and this is especially for product leaders, something I tell them is if you can get your team to just be wrong about one thing, that is a great framing for them to get started with rapid experimentation. Because if you tell them, hey, figure out the next way to like solve our churn issue or to make our company grow 20% month over month, that's a big ask. And so if you want your teams to start with experimentation and rapid experimentation at that, give them the goal of being wrong about one thing, right? The PayPal thing didn't work. The people don't even have a PayPal account. So you can increase the quality over time saying like start simple, start with being wrong about one thing. So that's it already. Summary, speed is better because we have the benefit of early insight. We avoid analysis paralysis, the two ways that I mentioned, not starting and not finishing. And we have a higher speed of to this point of being wrong, which is a falsification moment where we can actually course correct. So that's it from my side of the argument. And now I'm excited to hear what Ant can counter.
So taking the more extreme sense, and then we'll get into the nuances. But so all of that's well and good, Nico, but isn't it really about time to money, not time to market? All right. So it's like speed's great, but ultimately speed doesn't matter if it doesn't actually achieve the outcomes that we intended to. And if we take longer to do something, we spend a bit more time, maybe in discovery, refining it, ticking off some of those assumptions, making sure that we're testing it early, those types of things. Maybe we'll get to time to money quicker and we'll be able to, get those outcomes and drive that faster. There's another interesting phenomena that I've seen happening. It's also something I've had discussions with clients about. In fact, probably the earliest discussion related to this was probably 2020, 2021 maybe, where, the co-founder kind of came back and was like, hey, it was kind of inspired by like Apple's launches and a few other companies were doing it and was like, oh, we should kind of move to these, why don't we just release once a year? And we're like, that release is just like a really, really good one and it's a real bang for buck type thing. And I'll get maybe a bit more into differences with release and launching when we get into the discussion. But, there's something to be said. I mean, like companies are making this trend. Miro did a launch at the beginning of the month. I can still say that. It's the 30th of October. Canva had one recently. We see these all the time. And more companies are adopting it. And it's just showing that, I mean, if companies are adopting it, it makes me wonder how, like, it must be effective, right? Like this must be working. Spend more time on it, that type of stuff. One of the reasons why I think this phenomena is happening as well, I've been thinking about this a lot. Naturally, I've had a lot of conversations with clients about this, is, if you're familiar with the Kano model, which is what this is just a picture taken from Wikipedia. So if you go Kano model on Wikipedia, they explain the Kano model. And this is not a bad visualization for the part of the Kano model I wanted to point out. And what the picture is depicting is the fact that things degrade over time. So something that started as a delighter will eventually over time become a base expectation or a base need. Depends on some different Kanos will say base expectation versus base need, but it'll turn into a base need. For those who aren't familiar with the Kano model is a way of like essentially like categorizing, it's probably the right word for it, of different types of features. And we categorize them in kind of 4 different ways, where ones are delighters, that are things that surprise us, delight us. The performance like needs, which are things that, just as we incrementally make them better, they just become better. Like, like quality of this stream. the higher quality you make the stream, it's just going to get incrementally better. But it's not a delighter. You're not going to be like, ooh, 4K. Like that's not the delighter. Then you have like kind of neutral stuff that make no difference. And then you got base needs or base expectations, which, an example of a base expectation would be something like forgot password. If I signed up for something, I can't get through the forgot password flow, I'm annoyed. If you do have it, it hasn't won me. It's not the reason why I've moved to your thing. But what's fascinating about it is that these things degrade over time. So, and the best example I can give to this is, or the one that I think most people would relate to, is if you think about Uber. The Uber app was kind of a delighter, was the fact that you could see the cars, you could see your ride, you could see where it was. You didn't just have 5 minutes away. You were like, I can see it on the map. That's great. That was a delighter. Now, pretty much every single rideshare app, you use Deliveroo or whatever, Uber Eats, whatever delivery service, they have that as well. So you can see how that's just become a base expectation. If I signed up to a food delivery service, I wouldn't be over the moon about that, but I was once upon a time. So quality, I think, is something that's also happening in this way. If you just go back, and it's a fun experiment to do, actually, you can find old website. There's a history of the whole web. Basically, if you go back and look at websites, or even just think about it, reflect on websites from the early 2000s. It doesn't even need to be that long ago. It could be 10 years ago. And you're like, how do we use this? Or even apps. Look at some of the early apps from 10 years ago. You're like, experience was terrible. It didn't look great. And we thought that was amazing. I see this as something that is happening. The expectation around quality is just going up and up and up. And it's becoming more base expectations. So, moving too fast and too scrappy can have negative consequences, I think. One of the other things too is something I observe a lot with teams too, with discovery just gone wrong, is if we move too fast, we can have biased data. Who do we even ask these questions of? Oh, we just grab some random people. Well, did we spend the time to work out whether these people were the right people to speak to? Just a very quick story on that one. I'm working with a head of product, and he kind of started at a new organization, and he was looking at this existing research. And the research was focused on this new product offering that they wanted to build and take out to the market. Now, that new product was going to target a whole new market segment. So it was them expanding the company by offering this new thing to a new market segment that they haven't, it's not their existing customers. However, the team, not their fault, but the research that they did and the customer interviews that they went through, they did it with only their existing customers. So how valuable is that data if really we want to target people who aren't our existing customers, but we asked our existing customers to do stuff? It's kind of like garbage in, garbage out, right? Can you trust that data? So, and even that in itself is often in the name of moving faster, because it's hard to find these people. It's easier if we just use our current customer base because they're there, they're accessible, we're already talking to them. It's more effort and more energy and takes more time to go outside of it. We often, a whole bunch of things, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but we can prematurely converge on we have early signals. It's yeah, this is a problem, when maybe those early signals were false positives, or, we early converge onto a solution. And then one of the challenges there too is once you kind of converged onto that solution, it's hard to pivot away from it because you're kind of locked into that space. The other thing too is I think we often have this framing that all value is positive. So when we release something, it's positive. So it's okay if we go really fast, because even if the experience is not the best, at least customers can do it. Well, I kind of counter that, because as experience expectation goes up, then this becomes more of a challenge, right? Where you can deliver a bad experience that can lead to negative value. The great example, the example I use here is if anyone remembers back a couple of months ago, Google released a AI thing, and they've fixed it now. They've re-released it, but it was basically taking bad inputs from Reddit threads of people just trolling and serving it up as actual answers. And I tried to pick two that weren't super controversial, but you can Google it. It's a good laugh to see these. But yeah, so there is such thing as negative value. I mean, Google probably came out of this okay, but for other companies, maybe not so, end up on front page news, lose a whole bunch of customers, that type of stuff. So we also need to accept that not all value is positive. Moving fast can have negative consequences. I bet Google probably did minimal discovery on that and probably even minimal testing and shipped it really early. So, in summary, before we get into a discussion, because we all know that it's much more complicated than this, and there's a lot more nuances in there. So, also keen to hear what questions you have and what specific things you're looking at. I think quality is becoming a base expectation. So, they're kind of, I don't want to say gone are the days of move fast and break things. We'll get into like the context around that, but we're definitely moving into a world where it can pay dividends by spending more time to refine something, make the experience a little better and get that out. Almost wait a little bit longer. We need to accept that things have negative value. Obviously, moving too fast can just lead to garbage in, garbage out, bad practices, selection bias in data, poor data in general, false positives, all that type of stuff. And I think there's this interesting trend that's going on as well around launch events. So on that point, first question I want to ask Niko around this is, so we know that we've just kind of talked about two extremes. One being, just move really fast and be really scrappy. The other one being, let's hold out and, take a real long time to get something out the door, but try and get that right. We know that neither extreme is best. From your experience, how have you found like helping teams strike that balance, and where is that balance found?
Straight to the nuance. Yeah, I like your takes on the quality expectations. I think there's something really real. I think actually I guess it's kind of a good argument to make my point for discovery. Because I think the first difference to understand is that we have this difference of like what you put out there in a big show and then kind of what you experimented before. Concerning just the like experimenting before, so like talking about prototype tests, I'm talking about a A/B test, I'm talking about some user interviews, some qualitative analysis of stuff. I always push teams into the speed direction so far because I haven't worked with really any clients. I mean, there's two exceptions, maybe two teams, but that have gotten to too much speed. Right? Like the downside there shows up. Of course, at some point you're making overly bold decision based on pretty bad, mediocre data, and you're saying you're moving fast, but you're mainly breaking things. I think the thing that we got wrong is that the whole breaking things was just like a level of giving yourself permission to be a little bit bold and rash. Not that the actual intention is to break things. Like you don't want to break things. You're just saying, hey, if there's a side effect is that something breaks, I'm also okay with it. So to strike the balance, I would say it's first like identifying where you're at on that pendulum swing or on that dimension, and then basically pushing yourself or being pushed by somebody externally like me. Sounds like a fun job. To push you towards the center. And so just to kind of mark the extremes of this pendulum, just so how I look at this is I ask the simple question of like, when have you talked to a user last? When was the last time you were wrong about something? So when you realized you were wrong about something, and then how long did you work on that thing before you realized? So worst cases, right? I did this, and we can expand if you want to, but I worked on a massive data analysis kind of add-on product on the B2B side as a PM. And that was 6-7 months of work on three product teams. And it was complete flop. And so that's when we learned we were wrong. That's too late. I can tell you that. On the earlier side, I would say if everything becomes a user interview or everything becomes a micro survey, and you rush, especially the process of how to come up what to test. So you're basically saying, okay, I think we could have a payment feature here. Let me just do a Figma of the payment feature and let me show that to somebody. And if they like it, we'll ship it. And so you actually the most painful shortcut is the one where you don't take the rigor to actually set up a real experiment, like with the rigor of like we wanted to find this out, we are wrong with if we analyze this. This is what we measure. So I would say that is the kind of the way I estimate where a team is they're like, how long was it since you last talked to user? When was the last time you were wrong about something? How long did it take you to get to that wrong? And then kind of what way they have into getting into experimentation mode. If that is, okay, we have a user call tomorrow, like a call with a user tomorrow, let's just ask them if they like the feature. Then you're on the too fast side. And usually the answers of we talked to a user last quarter and so on indicates that you're on the other side of the spectrum and I need to move you towards the center.
You covered two things that come to mind here for me as well, which is one of them is the like it's like are you shipping to learn or you shipping to earn? Use that phrase, which is like we need to be careful here and we need to be also intentional about, is this an experiment that we're trying to learn something, or is this something that we're actually trying to put in the market? And you can kind of do both, but like you need to understand that if you're in the earn phase, that we probably should have done some earlier learning, right? Earlier. It's like that great example that you gave is a great one, right? Like we waited until we put this out in the market and waited till it fell on its face to go, oh, we now learned. It's like, well, maybe we should have done that earlier and tried to do it in a, people use like safe to fail experiment phrasing, like, can we do it in that kind of way? Like what ways can we do that? The second thing that came up for me that as you're talking about that, I think is another concept to think about with the nuance here is like, what is your constraint? And I think this is probably something for people to think about inside their context. And I think for you, Niko, because you do focus on product discovery versus me, who I'm more broader and I look at more than discovery, it might be a part of like our context is and your clients. Like a lot of your clients, you're helping them with discovery, which means that like them just moving fast and them just doing something is better than nothing. Where some of my clients are doing discovery and they've kind of almost indexed themselves on the other end of the spectrum where they're taking like 3-6 months to do discovery. And it's like, whoa, like this is really slow. So the concept I wanted to frame here for people to think about with their context is like, are you learning as fast as you can ship, or are you shipping as faster than you can learn? So like these two things need to have like an equilibrium. So in the 6-month example, most of the companies that I work with that are taking 6 months to do discovery, their learning cycle, i.e. 6 months, is way longer than their delivery cycle. Like they're shipping stuff every month or something. So it's like, well, how do we dial that down? And yeah, because like that's your constraint then versus like maybe in your context, I don't know if you want to share anything around that where it's like, actually we're releasing really, really fast. We're just not doing discovery. So now we just need to get discovery going fast. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's like a few things we have to dissect here. So I think there's like a lot of good observations there. I think it's true that probably the clients I work with right now, they have like a deliberate intention to become better at discovery. But that per se doesn't mean that they're not doing anything. I think what happens is that they that a lot of people like bring this kind of that bring kind of the whole de-risking for release, and they're confused that with like continuous discovery motion. So what I'm saying is that if you have something big that you're working towards, and you want to have a strategic research for that, then that is kind of the 6-month discovery where you see this kind of overdone. I would say like on the more like incremental research, it's almost unfair to call it research. So continuous discovery is a good term. There's almost not enough you can do. Like there's never basically too much you can do there because you're moving along with the development. So I think that's like a different thing. Like I have clients that have like innovation teams or research teams or like future looking teams. Which I will not judge every single CPO's decision to set that up. Like every context is different. But generally speaking, I would say the issue with that is that that you try to do a bunch of de-risking before doing a big project. It's very hard to do this much of de-risking and then work iteratively on the solution because you think you know already so much. And so I'm totally against that kind of research in most cases. I mean, if you're working for a massive pivot or a massive new market, that seems totally worth it, or like these massive product releases. But even then, trying to get as incremental as possible should still be the goal. And so the reason why you almost can't do too much discovery and you can't do fast enough discovery is that if you do it in the kind of the more continuous way, you're constantly building and figuring out, building and figuring out, and these kind of delivery and discovery loops are intersecting or overlapping, right? And then I think you have a good illustration there I use in some of my presentations. So if that kind of like overlaps, then you kind of can almost not do enough of it because it's just about learning loops, and the tighter they are, the better. But I want to just quickly throw in, and I posted this as a comment. I always love challenging my own assumptions, I guess, like my frameworks, right? And I found this. Shannon was in Munich at a conference. I was sadly wasn't there, but the postdoc CPO, I guess, CEO of postdoc, was speaking, and she did quite a good write up on what he talked about, and it's very much in line. I love postdoc. It's a cool company, and they have great writing as well. But they're really focused on teams that have like almost no PMs basically, and then they just like the engineers know how to measure stuff because obviously they're in this kind of environment, and then they just make assumptions, test stuff by building it lightweight, and then test it with a certain set of users. Like that is completely out of what we usually work on, right? That is no PM, that is always building, no experimentation other than building, right? So we're not doing any interviews, we're not doing any surveys. We're doing literally like we build to learn, but we build so fast, and we don't even have product management. So it's, even though I totally am like strongly minded about this, I always love challenging myself. So just have a look at that. I think that's interesting. Maybe that sparks some discussion here as well, or some questions in the audience. But I just find that always interesting. Is that doesn't mean it's the only way, right? There is another way. I just find personally that most organizations, to get them that they ship like different code to different amounts of people to build to learn in like a 4-hour increment, that's a really, really hard task to do. And I'm sure Posto can do it, but I'm not like coaching a company to do that. That's massive. That's a big effort. And so setting up lightweight experiments that are no code or whatever, like it's just a way easier thing to adopt. So that's kind of why I end up where I end up. It's not because I think there's no other truth, but it's the thing that you can actually adopt as a company normally. So that's a little bit of a rant in different directions, but I hope it's I hope it's a little bit useful.
Oh, yes, it is. And I definitely want to touch on the post hog thing. I'm going to pull up just, uh, okay, if I say your name wrong, please correct me. His comment, because I think this also touches on some of the new ones, right? So speed versus quality depends on the audience. Innovators may prioritize speed, overlook imperfections. Yeah, whereas a broader audience can definitely like the majority expect high quality. So some of the things he's talking about there is the diffusion of innovators, I think, I'm assuming, which is basically you have like early adopters, innovators, those people do overlook imperfections. When you have a product that is more mature, definitely post or high growth in the post-growth phase, because the only way you get growth is by starting to tackle the majority, at least the early majority. And those people tend to expect high quality. They tend to expect things to be more stable. So one of your contexts here is also to think about, am I like a Scrappy startup that, we have 5 customers and 3 of those customers are my brothers and my cousin and my mom. So like, if that's the case, then like your risk, like, so you can think about this in terms of risk as well. That's why I like thinking about discovery as a de-risking activity. Your risk is really low because, like, worst case, your mom's going to tell you that it's great anyways. You're probably just 2 customers that are going to tell you something otherwise. So you could prioritize speed there, and you could just like, bugger quality. Who cares? Like, we just need to get stuff out the door really, really quickly. Versus you're a mature product, you have millions of daily active users or something like that. Maybe not even, you don't even need to be that high, like hundreds of thousands. Or even something where it's like high risk, like financial, right? we probably should have, ease the brakes, slow it down a little, dial up the quality. There's a nuance in all of this as well that Niko, you did touch on, but I just want to zoom in on, which is even if you are millions of users, you can still break things down. And if we move into, and this is why I frame that, like, are we delivering really faster than we can like do discovery, or are we doing discovery faster than we can learn? Because the goal is an equilibrium between that. And even if you have a lot of customers, you can still decouple things like releasing and launching. And like I could release it to 1% of users. And then it's like it's a lot less. Then like if there are imperfections, it's okay. But I'll only dial it up to everyone once I feel like it's in a good place. And not that I've seen the inside of Canva and Miro to an extent. I don't have extensive knowledge of how their practices go, but they do these things where they're not when they do these big launch events. It's not the first time they put these in front of like customers. They've used them themselves internally. They've started to drip it out. In fact, Miro is a great example. A lot of the things that they did launch were things that were already available and have been available for a while. So there's no reason why you can't decouple these things as well. So I think one of the traps that companies get themselves into, and I think you touched on it, Niko, is like we kind of put it all together and we feel like, oh, it's this big release thing, so I have to do 6 months of discovery because this release needs to be perfect. But we can break those things down.
And I think it's like a can. It's like a frame that needs to break. It's a matrix that you need to leave somehow. I just grew up not in the matrix, and so I never knew that I was so fortunate. I guess so. My first like real software engineering and then PM job happened in this German speaking LinkedIn competitor platform with I think 18 million registered users at the time. A lot of them inactive, half of them, but still millions of people active a day and a month. And I grew up in that environment, and it was the most natural thing that we would release several times a day. And we have 50 product teams who released independently, except for the mobile teams, right? They have like actual release cycles. And what I had was a self-built, I just posted this in the chat as well, a Launch Darkly, like a cool tool to kind of do this feature flagging and percentage rollout. We had a self-built solution that looked like a really crappy backend. But the two features it had, well, I guess three, it's upload, so a slider from 0% to 100%. And so you could move the slider. You could say, hey, this feature flag, I want to release to 5% of people or 10% of people or 100% of people. The other two features were upload a CSV of whitelisted people and upload a CSV of blacklisted people. And so what we got, if this was, I worked both B2C, B2B there. Let's say in B2B, what we got was a blacklist of people of saying like, hey, their key account managers are touchy or the clients are touchy. They're definitely not early adopters. They don't want anything new before it's like sound. So we had this list. Any sales rep could always add their customers to that list. Then there's that's the blacklist. You put that in, right? So they never get new features. Even if I roll out to 10%, they're never hit. Like they are never the lucky ones. And then other way around, you could add a whitelist of saying like, okay, these are explicitly people, and they had a group name, right? Like these are early adopters, or these are people that are interested in payment features, or that are interested in promotional features. Okay, great. And that was a pretty ugly tool, like a basic Bootstrap, like Bootstrap as in the UI framework, UI. But it was so effective, and I grew up with that as a PM, and I thought this was normal, and I realized it's not normal. And the reason why I'm like shouting out this tool is just because it's a pretty simple to implement way. And now there are tools like this. Back then, these tools didn't exist. And because I think Raul was saying that like this negative value is something that really struck with him. And I think this is the simplest way to reduce this, because whatever you do is, if there's negative value, this is usually because there's like some outsized risk that you have a very hard time figuring out without code, like without building it. So let's say there's like legal risk, right? Like you could have a small group of people who you manually inform about the things that are going to change, and then you roll it out to just them. It's the simplest tool you can use to kind of make these crazy outside risks smaller. Because all the other stuff, like you people don't like it, people won't buy it. These are also risks, but these are usually not the risk we would identify with this negative value. So the negative value thing, like if Google rolled these AI responses out responsibly to first internal users, like their own employees, they have a bunch of them, get feedback, right? That would have helped. I don't know if they did that, but it doesn't look like they did it. Then the second step would be like, okay, there's some whitelist of early adopters, maybe friends of friends, maybe other startup employees, whatever, like some buddies you have a list of a couple thousand of those. Shouldn't be a problem for Google. Then 1%, 5%, etc. That's the easiest way, I think, to de-risk, and it's an infrastructure play. Like you have to have that infrastructure in place. I thought this was I took this for granted, and now I don't anymore. But I'm saying if you don't have that, that's so valuable to get into place for all kinds of releases and for all kinds of product teams. So yeah, maybe just a simple thing that maybe is hard to get internally done, but it's a simple thing that adds so much value to your product development cycle.
Yeah, and I think those things are the things that will help you speed up the development side. So again, if you're like looking at your, are we discovering faster or are we delivering faster? These things help you deliver faster and also gives you a great space to be able to experiment. So then if we go back to that other principle about like, am I trying to learn here? Am I trying to earn here? It's like, well, I'm still in the learning phase. Great, I got instrumentation and tooling that's going to help me be able to learn earlier, do it in a safe way, do it in a way where I can, and then as I do that, because this is the beautiful thing about continuous discovery and continuous delivery, which ironically was a talk that I did this morning at a company. But the beautiful thing about that is as we do these cycles and these iterations, we increase quality. That's like the whole intent behind it is we start more scrappy and more lightweight and we continuously layer it on. Obviously, that's hard to do if you're stuck at a company that's doing 3-month releases and you don't have all these things that, Niko was talking about. Then you're stuck in this like, well, great example. And this is where I wanted to bring it back to post hog is another dimension to think about is like, how quickly could we fix this? So something goes wrong. We launch it. We didn't expect it. Unintended consequence. We're on, front page news. How quickly can we rectify that? Now, if you obviously there's tooling that's going to help you do that safer because you're going to do it to 1% of users and it won't even end up on the news. But the other piece of the puzzle is like how quickly can we fix that? Now, if you're stuck in these 3-month releases, it's going to take you a long time to, maybe you can do a hot fix on the weekend and you kind of break glass and everyone gets involved and maybe you take it down, but it takes you a long time to actually get that next release out and to repair it. Now, if you think about post hog, I would imagine, just a hypothesis, but they're really rapid. So they're going to run one of these things and their ability to turn it off, improve it, do a V2 is really, really quick. So for them, I guess they're in a environment that risk is lower because like they're not a bank. I'll just use that as an example, or an insurance company, or like there's a lot of regulated type things. We're not dealing with payments, people's identity. So not only are they in a environment where I guess the risk is lower, and so it's easier. They're also in a space where I think they can move really, really fast. So they can fix it. They can kind of like reverse it. As Tim just said in the comments, reading the comment about like reversing the risk. Yeah, that's like that's part of it too. Yeah.
But that's also, so that's a sure industry and appetite, a risk appetite of the company and so on. I think that's absolutely true. I think just one thing to be careful about is that it doesn't become an excuse. So it might not be, but it might become an excuse in the sense that if you have, and again, this was just something I saw doing it, and then I saw other companies not doing it, is that if you have the ability to roll things forward and backwards, you give yourself permission to do that. And to give yourself permission to do that, you have to have the kind of social infrastructure almost in place, meaning that everybody needs to be on board with this. As in customer-facing teams need to understand that things that are released don't necessarily stay released, or that things released are not necessarily available for everyone. Sales leaders can't tell their teams like go sell this thing before it's even out there, before it's validated, before it's proven. And and communications channels are set up towards the end customers that say like, hey, sorry, like we had to roll this back, or early announcement, you can join this feature, like this early adopter beta version now if you want to. Here's an opt-in. So there's more mechanisms that build up around it. And so then all of a sudden, even in more regulated industries with slow release cycles, that makes it more possible to do these things. But the I would say the biggest excuse that is taken is that we can't release this way. So this feature is the exception, right? And the issue there is it's a way of thinking. It's really, really hard. But if you think modular, if you try to build two-way doors, right? If you try to say, if we ship something, we have to be able to roll it back. If we ship something, it has to be so modular, so insulated that it doesn't break 18 other things that we then have to fix. And if we would roll it back, we have to change everything back, right? So you're starting to think more modular, and you're starting to think about limiting risk in the way you scope features, releases, etc. And if you don't get away from this whole like it's all integrated, we have a technical monolith, we also have a product monolith, like like if the product itself is monolithic in the sense that everything is so interconnected that there's a V1 and then there's a V2 and we will never go back, like there's nothing in between, so if you don't get into that mindset, you will never be able to release this way. And so that's just one thing I wanted to point out. This is also a shield. It's like we can't even imagine how we would do a two-way door thing here. Like this is so integrated into our contract structure or whatever. And it's like, well, then you first have to clean up the contract structure so you can actually roll something back. So it's a way of thinking. Obviously, some industries way harder than in others, but I'm just saying, like, don't use it as an excuse.
I agree. I love the don't use it as an excuse piece. To stay on the quality side of the fence as well, put that hat back on. I'll also say trying to move fast is not an excuse for some basic things as well. Like, do we have selection bias in the people that we're talking to? If you're running a survey, let's at least pause, Google a sample size calculator, work out what an appropriate sample size would be, and at least try and aim for that. Like, you might not get that sample size, but at least try and aim for it. Like, try to learn a bit more about, statistics and stuff and differences between like averages and mediums. So you can just learn about when data's going to be lying to you. So I also think it's not an excuse for bad, research and discovery practices, to stay on the quality side. I want to pull
Of
up.
course. There's quickly just one
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
There's the simple thing is just like it's so simple that I don't the strategizer test card.
Yep.
If like take that if you don't have anything else, fill that out, and there will be like 80% of the rigor of we thought about what we wanted to do prior. Now, sample size, like etc. This is not perfectly in there, but at least do that. Even if the experiment takes you 24 hours, it's worth filling out that damn card. Right? Because you at least have the rigor to say, when are we wrong? What are we measuring? What are we looking at? What's the methodology? Just do that as a 80/20.
Totally. I think it's a good one. I wanted to touch on this question. So, question about if we developed a minimum desirable product for an enterprise solution, digital front door products, what all the basic components should we look upon considering speed and quality both needs to be balanced?
Yeah, no, that's good. So I guess minimal desirable product for an enterprise solution. So I think there is like of course there's a lot of context here, like as in what are the enterprises buying, what's the product scope, etc. But to try to generalize here, if we um, think in minimal desirable, which I understand, like it makes sense, what often happens is that we think like this is our ideal client and they have this massive problem, and maybe I should find an example. Let me use the product that we've launched, Jutu, as an example. We thought, okay, this is for enterprises probably because they want to do continuous discovery. It automates recruiting and scheduling for them. Okay, great. What we realized is that the feature set that you need is kind of comprehensive in a sense that you need CRM integrations, you need data imports, you need email automation, you need kind of their domain register because they want to use their own domain. A lot of these things. So enterprise clients, high I mean, back to Ant's point, right? They have quite high expectations these days. So minimum valuable is it might be really hard to get with what you're trying to do. So there's either changing the ICP, like changing the target group in the beginning. So a lot of startups or even innovation projects within bigger companies, they go first for an early adopter segment. So if I hear enterprise, right, the question is there a kind of enterprise that is an early adopter? So their level will be just lower, where they say, okay, I can use this, right? This is valuable for me. That would be one way of just making sure that it doesn't explode. Um, and I would say the other one is just to niche down what is the value you want to provide. Because if we're talking about speed versus quality, um, both the comprehensiveness of the feature set as well as the discovery will blow up with the amount of complexity that you're shipping. So or that you're attempting to ship or build or validate, right? Like whatever the idea is. So I would say these are like the two things to look at. It's like, okay, can we break down the scope to make it very niche? So while we get it enterprise grade and we do the discovery on like a very high bar, it at least doesn't explode in width, right? Like you go very niche. And the second one would be to actually find the target group that is okay with a lower bar, so you can speed up the discovery process and get started with somebody. Now, obviously, the transfer then to the more mainstream enterprise clients is another assumption that this leap of faith, like we can talk about it, but I would say these would be two ways to manage the speed versus risk here. Yeah.
I liked your about trying to find clients that might have a lower risk, or at least a lower barrier. That's a very clever way to a very clever dimensional lever to pull here. You get so many benefits out of that. One, you make a skinnier product, you get something out the door, you get feedback. They can potentially be someone who you can, whether they are up for co-creating or not. I think there's someone you can like leverage. I what I would just double down on is, in particular, because I didn't really think about that one. So very clever dimension. I love that one. Is just like the scope piece of the puzzle and just doing the discovery to try and get very narrow on, another framing to say is like, if this did one thing, like if this was one feature, that's all it was. And it's going to be a little bit more because you're going to have to put some base expectations in there. Like if we have a user account, there needs to be security, there needs to be, forgot password or whatever. But if it did one thing, what is that one thing that we're going to make it do? And then what is the minimum packaging and stuff that we have to do around that to really deliver that? That's kind of the lens that I would be putting on that for sure. It's very hard to say what a specific features they would be because it's very dependent on the product.
Yeah.
Like what is it? And yeah, is it an app? Is it web? Is it, there's so many other dimensions inside that.
Yeah, but Pulami was it that asked, right? Like you just DM me or us or whatever in case you want to talk specifically. I guess like doing this on air is also maybe like putting it on blast a bit. I was thinking about another thing, but now I dropped it. Damn. It was kind of insightful. Anyway, do we have other questions?
It'll come back. It'll come back to you.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should ask you a question if you're going to be thinking about that, but we kind of have time.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, we kind of have time for one more. I kind of scheduled for an hour for this, but yeah. So one thing that I was gonna ask you was whether there are any other tools that come to mind. I think Launch Darkly or just any type of like trying to decouple the releasing and feature flag and that type of stuff. What other tools come to mind that's going to help you get this balance? Could even be things like non-software. I realized that I was creating some anchoring bias there. So it could be things like, give an example that we talked about in person was like assumptions mapping. You already used the strategizer test cards. What else?
Yeah. I mean, the simple kind of like framework stack that I use 80% of the time is get to some kind of user outcome as the overall goal. If you don't have that, it's going to be hard to experiment later. Opportunity solution tree to kind of decouple problem from solution space, assumption mapping in order to make sure that you actually talk about assumptions and identify risk, prioritize these within the matrix that is given by the assumption mapping framework. That's useful. And then kind of set up lightweight experiments, have some templates how to choose the research method, and then set up the strategy as a test cut just to make sure that you have something that like you can stand behind. So that's like the quick run through of like usually the stack of things that I like to use with teams, and that's worked kind of well. So if you have any questions about any of those, like let me know. On the tooling side, I find it interesting because I mean obviously we built Juju over the last like year on the side while I'm also coaching teams. I wanted to have my feet in there as well in the real world and see if I could build a tool or we could build a tool that would provide value. And let me just reflect like super quickly on that because it's been like surprisingly hard to find companies that are super excited about it. So we found some and they're really excited about it. They like it and they want to use it in all their teams. But what we found is that there's a general like lethargy in picking up tooling that helps product teams because you can do everything with Miro. You can do everything with a Calendly or with a like with a Google Doc. And that is true. It just seems wrong to me that we have such a high leverage job as product managers, and what we're saying is you can do it in Excel. Like I understand that the tools might not be there right now, and I'm thinking really hard about what the future landscape will look like. Um, but I'm sure it doesn't look like we're still working in Google Docs or for everything, right? Or that we use Miro for all the things. Because Miro is a general purpose whiteboarding thing, right? It's an amazing tool. I love it. I'm just saying there seems to be this focus on training the people to do the things manually, while there is not as much focus in okay, what tools do we have that actually make us work smarter, not harder? The one example that I found in that I kind of explored in the last months is like kind of these analysis tools, which have like the AI component, right? Like you upload all your recordings of all your user interviews, and you kind of get to identify themes. And the cool thing is about products like Next is that they refer you back to the original source. So you get the kind of like summary AI theming, like the kind of vibe where you're like, I can do the shortcut to be faster, but if I doubt it, or if I want to make sure, or if I want to cover my ads, or if I want to send around an actual like clip, I get to that source right away. And so I find that's like, I'm not saying like that particular app, but I'm just saying overall, I think that's where it should go, is where we have a lot of aids, it goes quickly, but also I can do the manual path. Right now there's just really the manual path. I don't find product teams that have a bunch of automation. Startups are the only ones that do like Zapier stuff to, automate things. Otherwise, it's like maybe an analysis tool and that's it. So much more to come. Happy to talk about like the future of product tooling some other time because I spent quite a lot of time on it. Right now, I would say stick to the frameworks that I mentioned if you like them, and then try to set up some basic automations like scheduling user interviews regularly, use Maze or other tools for like surveys. Like just be clever, but there's no magic sauce right now. I would say on the tooling side, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and the one ad I'd probably add in there is I'm a big advocate for time box and discovery. It's a great way to kind of make sure that you don't spend 6 months doing it unless you just set a 6 month time box. But I hope you wouldn't set a 6 month time box. You'll set something smaller and try and really challenge yourself to do something rapidly and quickly. And accept that the time box doesn't need to be the holy thing. Like if you hit the time box, you need more time, do more time, like add more time is part of it. Last thing, we're pretty much at our time box that I set for this. But last thing I wanted to, if you haven't remembered your thing, Niko, if you do remember, you can always throw it in the chat here. I definitely find that people do give me the pings about comments in this chat post this event. The last thing I wanted to cycle back to you was something that we talked about in person. You said something that I thought was really good. You mentioned, I'm going to frame it so you can elaborate on it. You mentioned like just thinking 80-20. So like focus on the 20% that's going to yield the result. And you said that where you think that as a product manager, as a product team, you really should invest your time and energy, that 20%, is in the assumption and getting the assumption right, because everything kind of goes off the assumption. So if you start in the wrong spot, it's kind of like that garbage in, garbage out. Elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's not what sells. I can tell you that. It doesn't sell with teams and it doesn't sell with CPOs and product leaders who are usually the buyers of my services. I mean, it's not that it doesn't sell at all, as it's not like really bad marketing or whatever. It's just, it's not the sexy thing that people latch
Yeah,
on to.
they want the silver bullet, right? Like, Niko, give me the silver. Like, tell
Yeah,
me, just give me the answer. Don't tell me that I have to do
yeah,
work.
exactly. And it is like it's boring. And also it makes your head hurt. But that's why it's so valuable. So I'm not saying like become scientists. Think like work on crazy H1, H0 hypothesis, like formulations and like we're not writing papers here. But simply going to the step of we believe that to be true, right? So we believe that is the simplest post that I put on the wall. And I'm just saying, okay, you're saying that the PayPal checkout feature would be really useful. What do you believe for that to be true? We believe that the users that are, like, quick example, the outcome is you want to increase the amount of people who actually went through the checkout funnel, right? And you're saying PayPal will improve that. Then you're making the assumption that the people that are currently not paying, they're not finishing the checkout process, they have a PayPal account. You're probably making this assumption, right? So we believe that the people that are currently not paying have a PayPal account. Second assumption you're making is the people that are currently not paying have, like, they would use their PayPal account. So the reason why they're not paying is not because the price is too high, but because the PayPal option is not there. And so you think about these assumptions that you're making, and that is hard and it like hurts your head, and sometimes they seem obvious. But this is where you can then laser focus your research afterwards. So what that means is now you don't need to find out all the things. You don't need to find out the UX of the PayPal button. You don't need to find out the market distribution of different payment providers. What you need to find out is that the people are currently not purchasing because of a lack of payment options. And then first, like that was the second assumption. And the first assumption was that the people that are currently not checking out have a PayPal account. And then you can laser focus on that. And that makes your life so much easier because you're not de-risking like other global factors that seriously like don't matter. Like the mobile friendliness of your page, right? Like that is another assumption that you're making, but that's maybe not the critical one right now. So it is hard work. It's the 80-20. There's a bunch of content out there. But it's still hard work. And so if you have this perspective of like wanting to be 80-20, being efficient with your time, spend a lot of time on understanding assumptions and working with them naturally, getting your team to do it. And once the whole team works in assumptions and maybe the product leaders also get it, it just makes everything so much easier and more streamlined.
Yeah, I would plus 100 on that. And as someone who, and Niko, you're in the same boat as well. Obviously, we coach and teach on this. It is hard, and people aren't used to thinking in this way, and it takes time, but it's important. It's imperative. For me, it is because you start in the wrong spot. You're focusing on the wrong stuff. That's where you're going to waste time, but also just get false positives, wrong data, wrong signals, and you're going to proceed with something that you totally missed a very crucial assumption. Like PayPal is a great example. It's just like, well, you realize that it actually wasn't that, it was price or something like that. To learn more about how to structure product discovery and some of those techniques that Niko mentioned at the end, like assumptions mapping and strategizer test cards, I got a whole free template. I got a video walkthrough of that. The link to the template is in the description. I'll throw that up right here. Give it a watch, and thanks.